Hello, I'm Carwyn Jones, and welcome to this series of podcasts where I'll be talking to the movers and shakers in the Welsh economy. What was their journey? What are they doing now? And what do they see as the future for their line of business and for Wales? I'm joined today by Derek Walker. Derek is the Chief Exec of the Wales Co-operative Centre. Derek, you're very welcome here.
Thank you.
Now tell us a little bit about yourself and what you did before you came to the Wales Co-operative Centre.
Okay, well, I'm born and brought up in Cwmbran. I was brought up on a farm, left when I was 18, lived and worked in London and Brussels and in different places around the world, and then came back in the early noughties. And my career before coming back to Wales and since coming back to Wales largely revolved around policy and campaigning work. So I was one of the first employees of Stonewall Cymru when it was set up in 2001. I worked for the TUC for many years as head of policy and campaigns, and I've also worked for the Big Lottery Fund. And as a result of that experience, working with trade unions, working in the third sector, working within the social economy, about 8 or so years ago, I ended up becoming Chief Executive of the Wales Co-operative Centre.
A strong record in public affairs and in policy development. Big Lottery you mentioned, TUC and Stonewall. And then, of course, Chief Exec. How big a jump was it to be the head of an organisation after working in campaigns and policy?
I think it's quite a change. Nothing prepares you for doing that job other than doing that job. So from running a small team of about, 15, to an organisation of 80 or 90 people, that's quite a step up. But I was fortunate in that a lot of my experience was relevant in terms of the work that I'd done, the areas that I'd worked in. The Wales Co-operative Centre needs to bid for contracts and grants to deliver on its objectives. And having worked for the Big Lottery Fund, I'd had experience from the other side of the funding environment, and also having worked in local authorities earlier on in my career. So that stood me in good stead. But I was also fortunate in that the organisation was in a great place, has a fantastic board, and I was blessed with and still blessed with a very good team around me, and that's always helpful.
Now, you have a master's degree in international journalism at Cardiff University. Were you ever tempted to go into journalism?
I did think about it when I first left the master's degree, but by that time I was already working for Stonewall. So I was working for Stonewall part-time whilst completing my master's at JOMEC. And I was loving that job, and I thought, well, I'll just carry on with doing this. And then a job at the TUC came up, so one thing led to another, and I stayed in the public affairs and policy side rather than in the journalism side.
And that journey then from the Wales TUC to the Big Lottery Fund, very different organisations.
Yes, in many respects. I mean, what I've been really interested in as a common theme, and I know it's interesting for many people, motivates many people, is a work around social justice. And so working for Stonewall, working for the TUC, working for the Big Lottery Fund, all enable you to do that kind of work. So the Big Lottery Fund had at its mission at the time, and it's very relevant to its work now, working to support people and communities in need, and those that are most in need. And so, although they might look like quite different organisations from the outside, there are lots of values that all of those organisations hold, and which are important to me in my career, and that's what led to my work there. And
in January of 2011, you joined the Wales Co-operative Centre as the Chief Executive. Tell us a little about the Wales Co-operative Centre and the kind of work that it does.
Well, the Wales Co-operative Centre is an interesting organisation in that it was set up by the trade unions. So it's set up by the trade unions back in the early 90s. So obviously I had that experience and knowledge of the trade unions coming into it. And it was set up by trade unionists who'd looked to what was going in other parts of Europe and in Spain in particular. And they felt Wales needed an agency to create homegrown businesses and homegrown jobs through cooperative structures. And they felt, I think, at the time that we were doing well, and there was a lot of focus on attracting inward investment, but there needed to be more focus on supporting homegrown businesses, particularly in the valleys. And they'd seen that this had worked successfully in the Basque Country of Spain in particular, and they thought they would bring that to Wales. So the organisation was set up to do that, and that continues to be a core part of our work. The organisation is much broader than that. So if we'd stuck to co-ops, we'd have probably gone bust years ago. So we still do the co-ops and the social enterprise work, and that's a key part of what we do. But we broaden our work into other areas, so supporting communities, helping with skills. So we run a large contract with Welsh Government to support people with basic digital skills, digital inclusion activities. And we do various other things around financial inclusion and housing and so forth. So there's a broad range to our work. But if you could split it, you'd probably divide it into a sort of enterprise, social enterprise, cooperative area on one side, and then another area around strengthening communities and skills.
You mentioned the Basque Country and mentioned what's been happening there. The Mondragon Cooperative is quite well known, of course. And if we look at the financial crash of 2008, what always struck me was that the mutuals in the financial services sector, the building societies, all survived. And all those building societies who had become banks all failed. Did you feel that was in some ways a turning point as to people's view of the resilience of mutual organisations?
We thought so at the time, and I do think that did demonstrate the robustness of the mutual sector. In fact, I think looking back during the economic downturn, we saw that co-ops and mutual businesses more generally, not just in the financial sector, were more resilient and didn't suffer in the way that the traditional economy did so. And, there's good reason for that. If you're a member of an organisation and a business organisation, you feel some ownership for that organisation and some loyalty to that ownership to that organisation if it's being run correctly. You have a stake in that business. You get a return on the profits of that business. So you stay loyal to that business, but also you are able to influence what it does and how it does it. So I think that stood co-op and mutual businesses in good stead in difficult economic times. But the takeoff that we would have liked to have seen in the cooperative and mutual sector across the UK hasn't occurred to the extent that we would have liked. And there are various reasons for that, in my view, but it's still quite a small part of the Welsh economy and of the UK economy.
So you mentioned that there are reasons for that. What are those reasons?
Well, one of the big reasons I always think is something around awareness. So I left school in Cwmbran 25 years ago, and I wasn't taught and didn't know what a cooperative or a social enterprise is. So if you leave school and you have no idea what that type of business model is, it's not surprising that when you look to set up a business or look to do something in your community, you don't look to that type of business model. So there's a big part around lack of awareness and lack of understanding of what a co-op or a social enterprise is. Many people will know what the co-op is. They'll think of the funeral parlour, they'll think of the supermarket, but they won't necessarily understand that it's a democratic business model, it's a business that makes profits and is tried and tested. So that's one of the issues. Other issues include access to finance. So it's more difficult for a co-op to raise finance because of its membership structure. It can't go to the markets and raise equity finance in the same way as a shareholder business can. So this can prove challenging too. We do find also that it can take a bit more time to set up a co-op business because you're working with several people. It's not just one person going off to Business Wales, setting up a business and deciding what you want to do. You have to discuss that with the other cooperators, with the other members of the business, and that takes more time. But the statistics show that time is well worth it because those businesses, once they are established, are more likely to last.
You mentioned the co-op, as people would call it, there, and the long history of the co-ops in Wales. Sadly, of course, diminished in the early 80s when a lot of them closed down, I remember. And you're right, people are familiar with that model. And of course, the farming supply cooperatives, although buying from a cooperative is one thing for many farmers, selling into one is a bit more of a leap for many of them. And there's also, I suppose, a line of thought, I've heard it said, that cooperatives tend to be small. Now, we know from other countries that isn't the case at all. I mean, what countries would you point to as being great examples of how cooperatives are a major part of the economy, and also, of course, sizable enterprises?
Yeah, well, that's exactly true. They are sizable enterprises in the UK. You know, the cooperative group is a big business. John Lewis is a big business. Some of the agricultural cooperatives that operate here, like Arla, are big businesses. But they are a much bigger part of other economies around the world, and that's in Europe and in parts of the world. So in India, for example, you see a lot of big cooperative organisations. You see the credit unions, which is a financial cooperative, being very big in Ireland, and that's a lot to do with the support and the contact with the Catholic Church in Ireland. So you do see the model working at scale, and you see it at the small level too. So it can work at all levels in all sectors. It's a very flexible model in that sense. It's not something that's restricted to retail, but you do see more of them, obviously, as with SMEs more generally at the smaller end.
You mentioned credit unions there. Their genesis, of course, was in Canada, but Ireland really took them on board to the extent that it is possible to get a mortgage from a credit union in Ireland, and that contrasts with what we traditionally found in Wales, and the fact we have a lot of small credit unions in Wales. You work with the credit unions. What sort of difference do you think the credit unions have made over the past decade? We've seen more that have come about. We've seen some that emerged, of course. Is there a need to look at the structure of credit unions again, for example, and what could be done to encourage the sector further?
We don't work directly with credit unions much any longer. Credit unions, many of them were established by the Wales Co-operative Centre, or we supported them to establish, but we don't have a lot of direct contact with credit unions at the moment. They have their own support structures in place and their own associations that support the development of those businesses. We're actually seeing there are a number of credit unions in Wales, but we have seen over recent years a number of mergers. So in North Wales, the North Wales Credit Union, I suspect, is probably one of the biggest in Wales, and that has come about because of credit unions merging. And the credit unions, in my view, do a great job. You know, they offer a variety of products, savings and loans traditionally, and they offer that to people and sometimes businesses in local communities. And we know that many of the so-called high street banks are no longer on the high street. And so credit unions are in that space and are able to offer savings and loans to those businesses. One thing that I'm involved in at the moment on the board is the new bank Cambria, which is a cooperative community bank that's on its first stages of being developed to try and offer a cooperative community bank which has services to businesses and individuals all across Wales. So we're at the very early days of that, but that is a response to high street banks leaving our communities and offering our communities a banking service close to where they live, better relationship banking, and hopefully better investment in those communities, because I think the statistics show where those high street banks leave, you're likely to see those communities see less lending to businesses in those communities, which is obviously a big impact on the economy.
Yeah, you've hit an important nail on the head there. We've seen the decline of bank managers. Banks were run as part of a group by one manager. Now, of course, decisions are taken by algorithm pretty much. And a lot of businesses have said to me, well, we can't get finance because the algorithms are geared for other parts of the UK and their economies, and they don't know the ground in the way that the old bank managers did, and they don't know the people and their likelihood of success, and all that's been lost. So it's interesting what you say there about returning to a more accessible form, a more human form of banking, and I think that's important. One of the phrases that you've used is community cooperative, and of course a lot of co-ops, that's what they want to be, to serve their community. But I suppose in some ways that holds back cooperatives in the minds of people. They think, well, they're just small community organisations. Now, in your experience, you will have come across some cooperatives that have got real potential to grow into something much bigger, and of course of benefit to the people that they then serve. Where do you think the main growth areas are in the Welsh economy for co-ops?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like you say, there are that range of cooperative businesses. Firstly, before I come on to the question directly, I mean, what you see from a cooperative business is a business that is anchored in Wales. So it's not going to be easy for that business to be shifted to other parts of the country because of its ownership structure. Ownership matters in this context. So some of our the businesses that we work with, we help business owners to sell their business to their employees, an employee buyout it's called. And it's an issue in Wales in that we have a high number of older business owners who are looking to retire and exit that business. And so there are various options for those business owners. They can pass it on to their family, they can sell it on the markets, but they could offer it to their employees. And I think a big growth area for co-ops in Wales, rather than a sector, is looking at employee buyouts and succession, and supporting some of our businesses that are business owners that are looking to exit to pass that business on to their employees. So one of our businesses that we've worked with in Aberystwyth, I think it was a spin out for the university, doing really high tech stuff with in the brewing industry, easily could have been snapped up and taken to the Cambridge area, for example. But the business owners there decided to pass it on to their employees. And so that business is continuing to do well. And that business is staying in a rural part of Wales, offering good quality jobs and profits being reinvested in that area. So I think a growth area for co-ops in Wales is really supporting small businesses and family firms to pass those businesses on to their employees to become co-op businesses. And I've been delighted that organisations like the Federation of Small Businesses and others like the Institute of Directors are very interested in that too, because they recognise that succession is an issue for their members.
You've moved on there to future planning. If I could take you then on to your views on the future of the Cooperative Centre and the work that it does, and of course the sector, the cooperative sector. What do you think are the main challenges and opportunities over the next decade or so?
For the sector, first of all, we've just done every 2 years we do a mapping exercise to ask the sector, how are you doing? What are your prospects for the future? And what can we do and others do to help you to grow? Because we're all about helping the social economy, social enterprises and cooperatives to flourish. And no surprise, Brexit comes up as the first concern for our businesses as a negative impact. So I think something like 50% of the businesses that we surveyed said Brexit was a big concern, and 9 out of the 10 of those businesses said it was likely to be a negative impact. So we've got to manage the impact of Brexit on those businesses. And I'm proud to say, as a centre, we were one of the loudest organisations, even though we're small in size, to say we thought that Brexit wasn't a good idea for businesses, and many business organisations weren't quite so vocal, and I wish they had been. So Brexit is one factor. I think succession is another. Even within our sector, we have a relatively older leadership group within the co-op and social enterprise sector, so we need to plan for that. And there are issues around access to finance, and there are issues around skills that our organisations and businesses that we work with have identified. Having said all that, that's all doom and gloom, isn't it? But having said all that, the sector's doing pretty well. So we measure the sector, and it's not a perfect exercise, but we've done it 3 times now, every 2 years, and the sector, in terms of its size and turnover in Wales and the number of jobs that it has within the sector, that has grown substantially. And so we see an upward trajectory for the sector. We see confidence within the sector. We see increasing amounts of those businesses growing their businesses through strong trading. So there is some really positive possibilities for the sector, and I think the direction of travel for economic policy is in our direction. We're looking for more inclusive, a more inclusive economy, and how better to achieve that than through co-ops and social enterprises.
And what do you think will be the future in terms of the structure of cooperative businesses? Will we see bigger ones in the future, or do you think they'll stay almost entirely as community-based businesses?
Well, they're not almost entirely community-based businesses, but a lot of them are. I think we'll see growth, and I think we'll see continuing growth. I think we'll see continuation of secondary co-ops, so co-ops coming together and keeping their entity, their own ownership structure, but working with other cooperatives to achieve scale and growth. And I can see sectors of our economy where we are likely to see, substantial growth for cooperative businesses. So although they work in lots of different areas, I can see around tech, I can see around energy, I can see around social care, I can see around housing, a growing number of cooperative businesses. So I hope to see much bigger businesses and a stronger sector in those areas in the years to come.
One of the points you made a little earlier was the B word, Brexit, and your experience is the same as mine, where businesses are very, very concerned privately, especially with a no-deal Brexit, but are very reluctant to express a public view because they fear losing customers and annoying their own employees. And it is certainly very frustrating. I mean, those of you familiar out there with the film High Noon, you'll know that Gary Cooper is there taking on three men who are coming to wreak havoc in a town, and everybody's very supportive, but when the time comes, they all back away. And it's a little bit like that, I've found. I don't know if you see it the same way.
It's really frustrating. I can see no upsides from a no-deal Brexit, and we seem to be hurtling towards it. And the damage to people and communities of a no-deal Brexit is huge. I see within the businesses that we work with, people becoming more vocal about it. So my own personal view is the business community needs to be increasingly vocal about, and that is starting to happen, about the dangers of a no-deal Brexit and the damage that could do to the economy. We know that we're already seeing that effect with inward investment dipping, businesses delaying their decisions, businesses upping sticks and moving to other parts of the world.
Final question then, what does the future hold for Derek Walker?
Oh, well, that's a good question. This is, the best job, and there is so much potential for the co-op and mutual sector in Wales. And I feel, as I mentioned earlier, we're really going with the grain of policy now. Future Generations Act, inclusive economy, people wanting to do more business with businesses that they trust. So I can see a really positive future for the sector in which we work. I think, and I would like to be very much part of that. There's still a big job to do, and we're making good progress, but lots more to do.
Derek Walker, Chief Executive of the Wales Co-operative Centre, thanks for joining us today.